my seats. Here we go.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on this first day of Route to Europe. As Luthier said, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Anko van der Werff, who is the President and CEO of SAS. So thank you so much for taking time out of your, I'm sure, incredibly busy time at the minute to be here with us today.
Happy to be here. And chicken or pasta, David? What would it be? I'll do the water first, and then I'll do your meal later. But anyway,
fantastic.
All right. Yeah. Half the audience didn't get that joke. Anyway, it's still morning. Good morning, everyone.
Everyone should have had the coffee by now. It is 11 o'clock.
There we go.
I'm sure everyone in the room is already familiar with SAS. It's an airline that has connected Scandinavia to the world for 75 years and the world to Scandinavia. But I think since you took over in 2021, was it? It's been on quite a journey. You've made some massive changes as part of efforts to build a competitive and financially strong airline. I know when we were last together on stage at Route to Europe, it was in Bergen in 2022. And I think back then, SAS had just launched SAS Forward.
Yeah,
but you hadn't entered Chapter 11.
Nope.
You hadn't entered that process. But since then, there's been all kinds of progress made. Yeah. You've reached agreements with labour unions. You've continued to reduce costs across the business. And I think perhaps most key of all, you've secured an exit finance agreement, which I know we're going to talk about in some detail later, because obviously the implications of that is that you're leaving Star Alliance and you're going to join SkyTeam.
Yeah.
At the same time, you've launched new routes. You've continued to expand the business and be a driving force in sustainable aviation, which we can talk about as well. But perhaps then, first of all, if you could just give us a little bit of colour on some of those major changes that have happened in recent years and where you're up to now in terms of that restructuring.
Yeah. Well, thanks. It's somewhat pleasant to listen to you because so much has been done, but it's also painful to realize it's only 2 years and just feels like 20. And I had...
You've not aged today.
Well, so I had a full head of hair 2 years ago, and so this is what stress does to you, right? So here we go. It's remarkable, right? What happens in 2 years, and really just an incredible ride. Doesn't do justice, but everything that we've tried and that we've been through. So hard work, relentless. For any of you that are thinking about a restructuring, don't. It's not fun. You only do this when you really have to. And I do think that we are well on our way. We have at present, call it 3 more months left, right? 2.5 months if everything goes really according to plan, and that really means that we're now within spitting distance of emerging. And the main things that have to fall in place. So I needed Chapter 11, and I'm happy to talk about why we did that and what the reasons were. But of course, that's a US proceeding, and so we also have to make it stick in Scandinavia. We are a Swedish AB after all. And so we will have to go through a Swedish restructuring, a Swedish reorganization as it's called. And we do that at the moment. We just launched that almost a month ago, 3 weeks ago. I was in court last week in Sweden, and that went well. There could have been some objections that would have been filed, and it didn't happen. And so that is also good news, right? People are really, I think, falling in line. And then there's of course the European Commission, right? So those 2 things are the main things that we're now in a way waiting for, having to take on ourselves. That Swedish reorg is of course a bit more work, and the European Commission is just waiting for them to come out with their eventual blessing, which we expect to get.
And are you confident of exiting within the first half of the year?
We think so. I mean, that's a bit of a loaded question because whenever we've said that we would come out, something always happens, right? Life does take twists and turns. I've quoted John Lennon many times, right? Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. We are firmly on 27th of June or 1st of July, right? Call it that week. We do believe that at least that Swedish reorg is something that indeed we can control, and to the best of our abilities and capabilities, we do control to come out, call it by that late June or first of July. And then, European Commission, you don't control, but I do think that given the relationships and given also the case, look, this is a case that is completely market tested. Yes, there's going to be write-off of state aid. And yes, Denmark as a state will stay in, but they are co-investing on a completely market-tested case, right? So you've got Gasleger, France-KLM, and Lind who come in, and so I don't expect any real turbulence there. It's a long-winded answer of saying we do expect, but hey, things happen as we have seen.
Okay, let's talk then about some of the more broader reasons of why you needed to do this restructuring process. Yep. I mean, why was it so essential for preserving the long-term future of the airline?
Yeah, I think as you have probably seen over the course of COVID, for many airlines in the world, and certainly in the area that I was before, right, Aeromexico, LATAM, and Avianca all filed, Philippine Airlines, others, Virgin Australia, Norwegian. I mean, there's so many others who've gone through restructuring. I mean, the fact of the matter is just that I think come 2020, early 2020, a lot of airlines immediately saw what was going to happen, and they, pulled the trigger, pulled the plug, whatever you want to call it, fairly quickly. SAS didn't, and what SAS did was pile on even more debt, and certainly state debt, and that became a balance sheet that was just unsustainable, literally just unsustainable. And the second thing is, of course, that SAS has always had a challenge with its cost, and I think a challenge even in the good years, right? I mean, when you look at 2015 to call it 2020, a lot of airlines made money, as did SAS, but even that money was still very low margins. So we had to do something different. Now, then the question is, what do you do and how do you do that? It took us, I think, a very long time because, it's not comfortable, right? It's not easy to take these decisions, especially not when you don't do them when you should have taken them, which was spring of 2020. Right? That's of course the logical moment when the entire industry goes in. That's the moment when you do it. And so when I arrived in 2021, there was this, I think, call it reluctance, not even hesitation. It was a reluctance to do anything. And then it was Delta, and then it was Omicron, and then it was Russian airspace. There was no escaping anymore. So we launched SAS Forward, but still with the intention of getting to an out-of-court restructuring. Then we had the strike in 2022, and that really was the end of it, right? So you have to, at some point, break through all the noise and say, well, look, the way we're going right now is just not going to happen. It's not going to continue. And so filed summer of 2022, and I think if it was a normal aviation case, then I think we could have been out in, call it 15 months maybe, 12 to 15 months. This case is special because of all that state involvement, right? It's not interference, and I'm really not negative in that sense, but it's difficult to get and to guide states through this because they are AAA nations, right? In certainly in the case of Denmark, a very strong nation, balance sheet in order and everything, and yet you're asking them in a way to follow the jurisdiction of somewhere completely else, and that was of course very different to anything that had been done before, and so we had to get all our ducks in a row and make sure we got somewhere. I think in the end that caused 9 to 12 months delays at least. But here we are, almost there.
Okay, fantastic. And you touched on as well the European Commission earlier, and we don't know what's going to come out of that process. But do you expect any remedies that are needed from the Air France-KLM investment? Are you expecting to have to give up slots or change your network in any way?
I don't expect the latter. I really am not sure what to expect. I mean, this is how do I call this? This is a bit more obscure, maybe. Now, that obscure is the wrong word because it makes it negative. But it's you have to realize an airline or a business is not directly necessarily involved with the commission, right? Of course, we try and engage and you try and have conversations, but it's the states who really go to the European Commission. They're the members of the EU, obviously, and an airline isn't. And so you have to go through the states who in the end apply really for that and who have the dialogue. So that makes it a bit more complicated. I would think that there will be concessions. I would certainly, in this case, do not see a reason for why that would have to be slots. And so I don't think that is going to be asked because, again, it's completely market tested. We, by and large, fly to, at least out of our hubs, of course, fly in non-slot constrained airports. So I don't think that makes any sense either. Right, so, but I do think that when you talk about state aid and of course all the support that we have gotten from the states and that we're now writing off, I do expect it to be something, but not on slots.
And what's your overall view on the European Commission's stance on consolidation at the minute? We're seeing delays to IAG and to Lufthansa takeovers. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's always a bit tricky because I'm too Dutch to not say what I really believe. So I find the European Commission limping on two thoughts, if you call it, right? They are, I think, a bit... here we go, right? On the one hand, the European Commission says we want to make, or Europe as a whole, I think, wants to make flying more expensive, right? So you got EU 261, and we have all these ETS schemes, and right, and for many of the right reasons, I get it. And then the argument really is, well, flying needs to be more expensive, right? We don't want to have these $9.99 fares out there because, hey, that's unreal and that's unfair to the environment, and there's lots of things I get. And then you talk about consolidation, and then it's like, hold on. You can't do that because then flying will be too expensive. I just thought you said you wanted flying to be more expensive, and so right. So tell me what you do want. So is then the conclusion that you do want us to be so expensive that we can't make any money anymore, right? I mean that seems to be. Something that I've always struggled with. I am very pro-state. I'm very open to government and government involvement. I have no problem at all with that. I am, for all records, not a conspiracy theorist in that sense, but I do find it hard to understand that on the one hand, we want to make it appears, more expensive, and on the other hand, you're not allowed to actively engage in M&A, which I still think is needed, right? When I look at the United States, and I've given this example many times before, I'm in the industry now 25 years, and that first decade was just, there's no other word for it, but was continuous slaughter in the United States, right? How many people have been laid off in the end between 9/11 and financial crisis and everything else, and every single airline in Chapter 11 and I don't know what. I think, seriously, when you add it all up, every single airline, airport, Boeing, everybody else, I can easily get to at least 1 million layoffs in that decade in the United States. Now, then everybody goes through their restructurings, they're allowed to merge, and from 2010 to 2020, that's been a fantastic decade, not just for airlines and airline profitability, but by no stretch of the imagination can you say that there's been a negative correlation to the US economy or GDP growth of the United States. Tremendous investments into product, new aircraft, but also new airports. I've worked very closely with Delta, as you know, and Delta has had, I think, 3 or 4 $2 billion projects each into Los Angeles, into LaGuardia, into Detroit, JFK. I mean, there's been so much airport investment in their own terminals, connectivity. I mean, look at what they've done, and that's just Delta, right? So, U.S. economy, certainly you can't argue that it was doing poorly, and certainly not as a result of airline consolidation. So, I do think it's been for me, call it role model or template to follow. And I think that in the United States, I understand all those discussions about concentration, but if I'm right by and large ballpark correct, I think 80% of traffic in the United States is in, call it, the hands of 4 airlines, and in Europe that is still with 17. Yeah, guys, again, right, very long answer, but the European Commission needs to come to a conclusion about really what it wants from a healthy environment, right? That bill, the sustainability bill that's coming our way, where we either will be able to pay something of that or we won't. But without an airline industry, I don't think that Europe will succeed either.
Okay. So SAS is part of the European consolidation story, or you're going to be. I think Air France-KLM, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's taken an initial 19.9% stake, but there is the option to take full ownership of the airline later in time. What's the situation there? Are there any discussions ongoing about that at the moment?
No, because first of all, we have to close this deal. And that's right, everything that I've said about European Commission and just waiting for this deal to be blessed. That's one, and then two, very important, and I keep on also making this point internally very much, we are still competitors. Even with 19.9, you are still competitors, right? So until they reach potentially an over 50%, right, the controlling stake in SAS, they don't have a controlling stake. It's really that simple, right? It's binary, and when you don't have a controlling stake, you're a competitor. And so, no, we have, this sounds maybe odd and very legalistic, but it's actually really the formal truth. We are not privy or party to that discussion, right? Because we're management and we're the subject in a way, right? We're not part of any potential put-call options between those investors. And neither have I seen that, and that's the God's honest truth. So yes, we know from Air France-KLM, because they've gone public, they also have, of course, their own fiduciary duty to stock market, so that there is potentially an option, right? I think at least in the press and elsewhere we have seen that it's about 2 years, right, at the earliest. Now, this summer is when we then hope to close on that 19.9, and then do the math, right? A few years later, they could. We don't control that, right? So it's really a question in the end for Ben and others about how they see that.
But ahead of that, there will be closer cooperation with Air France-KLM. Obviously, we know that you're leaving Star after nearly, well, the best part of 3 decades, really. You were a co-founder of that with Air Canada, Thai Airways, United, and others. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the positives of the collaboration that you see with Air France-KLM and with new SkyTeam partners?
Yeah. So I'm going to overdo this maybe, or at the risk of overdoing this, but you said there's going to be close cooperation. Yes, there will be, but indeed from a SkyTeam and bilateral, call it normal airline relationships, and nothing stemming out of the stemming from the 19.9, right? Because again, that's just not allowed. So yeah, leaving Star, I think, I actually don't know, but I think we've been in Star indeed 26, 27 years or something, proud founder, and have of course very good relationships, and that's always very difficult because at an individual level, I think all those relationships are really sound, and you can imagine, right, working with someone for 25 years, that's a long time, right? And you really do build, at various levels, you build profound relationships. I do think that as a whole, I have always had a challenge with Star and maybe also with the position of SAS itself, because we're not in joint ventures, and that is something that also Ben and right, Ben Smith, Air France-KLM, has been very vocal about. We do want to get to a new level of, call it, partnerships, and I am a firm believer that what we're having right now within that Star Alliance is only really, it's almost setting you back in time, right? Because really, airline partnerships have evolved. It's either equity and or JVs. And so, yeah, a co-chair corporation or an SPA, whatever, it's all nice and you can do something with it. And we're definitely going to do all of that with Air France-KLM and partners. But I think the real pudding is in joint bottom line management in the end, right? One way or another. And I do believe that when I look at Air France-KLM Delta and maybe also the blueprint for SkyTeam, they have taken a lot of what KLM and Northwest did in the 1990s, and that of course became Air France-KLM, and it became Delta Northwest or Air France-KLM Delta. It's a very different way of looking at things. I mean, for those of you that have worked at various airlines before, and there's some in the room, it's truly a different way of treating each other, and it starts. I was raised in that world where I worked for KLM, but we were in a joint venture with Northwest. KLM is blue, Northwest is red. Everything was purple, literally, and that was the color, and that was the color that you spoke about. Everything had to be purple, completely seamless. You couldn't think of your own contractual relationship with your airline. You were managing purple. And that is a very different way of looking at things. And I find in the Star Alliance everything to still be, more self-centered on many different levels.
Why have you never then had that relationship with your Star partners? Why have you never got to that purple level? You've always been excluded from the transatlantic joint venture.
Yeah.
Has there been any point of view that's thought prior to the Air France-KLM investment that you'd be better suited outside of Star anyway?
Well, we've had all sorts of discussions, of course, internally. I mean, just also with Star and with the key Star Alliance partners about entering joint ventures. But you have to just look at the facts, which is we never got in. Well, when you're not in, you're out. Okay, well, then what? Right? So then philosophically, you go to a next level. And so you have two options. You either join Sky or someone else. Now, that depended, of course, very much on the outcome of the equity raise. And again, that's not something that you can influence or steer towards because when you go into an equity raise, it's really an open race. And the other option is that you become the Switzerland of, right, Scandinavia in this case, if people understand what that means, right? You become neutral, and you partner up with whoever wants to partner up with you. Now, there's some very successful, I think, carriers in the world who do that. Some of them are inside alliances, some are outside, but they can just pick and choose, right? Emirates picks and chooses. Copa is in Star Alliance, but does a lot of work with a lot of different airlines, right, in Panama, and they have 75% beyond traffic. So that's, of course, something that we've also been discussing. I think in our case, given the strength of Air France-KLM, given the strength of Delta, and given the strength of Scandinavia as a whole, and the interest of that group also in us, I do think that our best option is to commit and be part of SkyTeam.
And when would you foresee perhaps entering that transatlantic joint venture with?
Yeah, so I can't really answer that. I can give you the steps. First of all, this transaction needs to close. Okay, call it summer. Then on the 1st of September, so the 31st of August is last day in Star, and then on the 1st of September is Sky. And then it's a negotiation period with Sky, and then there is regulatory approval processes. So that's not going to be a month or two, right? That's going to be an extended period of time before you're in. But I think, again, we have, after 25 years, we just have to conclude that it didn't work with Star to get into that A++ joint venture over the North Atlantic. And that at least we now have a new way of thinking about it, and hopefully will over the course of time.
One of the first things I think we're seeing at the minute, one of the first network shifts is you've announced Atlanta, which is obviously a big SkyTeam bet hub.
Surprising addition.
Surprising addition, yeah. I mean, what kind of shifts are we going to see then over the coming months? Is that the first of many? I mean, particularly on the transatlantic, obviously with the United codeshare will be, if it's not terminated already, will be terminating in the coming weeks, I imagine. Are we expecting to see more moves in that market?
Yeah, you'll see over the course of time, and seriously, we don't have that mapped out to the full month, but you will see over time us gradually untangling our, call it Star feed, Star connectivity, and you'll see us build that with SkyTeam, right? So it's in a way, very simple and somewhat emotional, I think, for people who have always connected 25 years. They've connected in Frankfurt, Munich. Well, they'll now start connecting in Paris and Amsterdam. They have connected at Newark. Well, they'll now connect to JFK. They've connected in Chicago. That will now be Atlanta, right? So yes, you'll see, of course, over time, a rebalancing of that network towards where your partners are.
And will we see your hub structure change? Obviously, the Norwegian state exited, was it 6 years or so now? As part of this process, the Swedish government is exiting as well, so you're only left with the Danish government. Will we see a change to that traffic mix in Stockholm and in Oslo following this?
Yeah, I've always found it. So the short answer is no, and I'll get back to it before anyone thinks that I'm not answering the question. So the answer is no. But then secondly, I've always found it surprising, right? Because um, do you have to have a state ownership in you to serve your customers? I don't know. As pro-state as I am, I just don't see the link, right? So. No, I don't think so. Oslo for us is extremely important. Norway is important to us. We have pretty much call it 45% slot share or something in Oslo. You're not going to do away with that, including serving the Oslo market. This morning I was on a flight from Stockholm to Oslo before connecting here, and there's so many connections that we drive from Stockholm to Oslo and then beyond. Right? It was really good to see. Very efficient airports, and I don't say that because they're here in the room. It just works, right? And so, no, I don't see that. The same thing with Stockholm. Stockholm is a good market. Stockholm has always been a market for us, and I've consistently said you don't. Even if right, Sweden is not within SAS, you can't take SAS out of Sweden, right? For that same matter. So these are markets that we serve. We have 8 million Eurobonus members. They're equally important to us. What you will see is, I think, some of the illogicalness, not a rich word, but you get it. We had all sorts of wide bodies still somewhere. Now, there will always be a New York. I think there will be a second one from Oslo. I think also there will be a second one from Stockholm over time. Certainly when you get access to those joint ventures, but hopefully already before, that you will have multiple long hauls from those markets. But the core of your long haul will be in Copenhagen. And that's just for a very simple reason that when you're so high up in North Europe, then the logical hub is in the most southern points, because the direction of travel from anyone living in Scandinavia is going to be south, right? I did this, which is a very fun game that you play with your children, right? So imagine that you are on the North Pole and you are exactly at the northernmost tip of the North Pole, and you take one step to the right, and which direction have you traveled? Well, the answer is south, right? You didn't go east, you went south. So wherever you go from the north, you go south. And so that's where you build your hub, and that's Copenhagen. So we had all these wide bodies going from Stockholm to Asia, which sounded very nice, but actually added a lot of complexity. I don't think they were great. Stockholm, Miami, yeah, nice, it sounds good, but I think you can drive far more simplicity, right, rather than having all these different spare part pools and different reserve crew and different spare aircraft potentially. You can now concentrate that much better and drive that over the hub. But there will always be selective and hopefully more long hauls from both Gardermoen and from Arlanda.
Okay. In those markets, though, I'm thinking particularly Sweden and in Norway, we have seen changing dynamics in recent years. We've seen in Norway the Widerøe Norwegian partnership. In Sweden, we've seen Ryanair really expand. And I know you've lost a little bit of market share in both of those countries. How are you responding to that change in dynamics and that increased competition in your home markets?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's increased competition. I think the competition has always been there, right? Because Norwegian and Widerøe were, of course, separate. Now they're together. Yeah, that's just the name of the beast. I think it's straightforward. It is called competition for a reason, and we'll have to deal with it. And of course, with our own slot portfolios and with our own product, we'll make that work. And once again, the transition to Sky, where hopefully you'll build those better relationships and have access to joint ventures over time, I think will add a lot of value to those passengers. Yeah, in the case of Sweden, Ryan is for many reasons an interesting airline. One of the reasons is that they also now already decided to exit the domestic market again, right? So they've tried, didn't make it work. I can see why, because there's frankly not much in the Swedish domestic market that works at the moment. Swedes
That's
find
just taxes, right?
It's taxes, and I do think that the Swedish government is thinking about abolishing that, which I think is a right way forward. Not because I'm necessarily anti-taxes, but I think because they're just... What is really good about Sweden and the Swedish government is that you can actually have a real rational dialogue with them, and somewhat of, it's not an agreement because clearly that's not in our control, but you can have a good dialogue. And the dialogue was always, look guys, we understand that we have to do something and that there will be taxation, but we should also be fair. We are in an international environment, and so as soon as there is a, call it, European playing field with regards to ETS or whatever sustainability taxing, then we should go for that, and we shouldn't be holier than the Pope in your national jurisdictions, because then you'll penalize the one that is in that particular one jurisdiction. And so, what seems to be the case, or where we're heading, I think, is that indeed Sweden understands that and says, okay, well, now there is European legislation, so let's follow that instead. So I think that's part of it. The second thing is Swedes as a whole, but Scandinavians, find it very comfortable to work from home. And they have digitally everything at home to actually work from home. And so you do see still that impact on corporate traffic. I think it is the reason why an airline like Bra keeps on restructuring, even more so than we do, or Norwegian, right? It is just difficult in these markets. There is a reason that Ryanair pulled out of the domestic market, right? So it is still a challenge, because that corporate domestic market is still heavily impacted.
You've had to pivot your network then more to leisure and VFR destinations, while at the same time reducing your cost base. And we've seen, obviously, as you said, Ryanair's come in, although they've not managed to make the domestic routes work. Then Eurowings, they're adding more international capacity in and out of Scandinavia. Have you had to change your thinking? Do you think more like an LCC than perhaps you would have done prior to the pandemic and prior to the Chapter 11?
Yeah, I think so, but that's I think something that I've always taken with me wherever I go. I remember back in 2015 or 16. Don't think there's anyone in the room who can vouch for this, but at Air Mexico, I hired a Ryanair guy to work on ancillaries, right? And that was really 2015, 2016. Developed a complete new digital IT suite, new websites, new app, new kiosks that were completely on ancillaries. I'm a big believer in that. I think it's fun. I think it's a commercially fun game as well. And I think it's very democratic, because people are different. Every passenger is different. So I'm a big believer in an ancillary game where I don't have a pet, but someone who wants to fly with a pet, well, perfect, right? Here is yours. And if someone wants to fly in business, well, we'll go for it, right? Seat selection in business, by the way, is a fantastic one, because everybody always thinks that that's a cheap way, and I will show you that the NPS scores actually go higher, because now the ones in the previous world, where you didn't have seat selection in business class long haul, for instance, the leisure passengers clog up the favorite seats of the ones who book late. And so now that's not the case anymore, right? So NPS actually went up and money goes up. So yeah, I've always been a firm believer that you need to move faster. I always think that the low-cost airlines do move faster than we do. And that is pretty universal, whatever other airline I've worked for. It's pretty much the same. We always think that we're the best thing since sliced bread. We always think that we know everything, and yet we only know really typically what works for us, and right, have a more open mind. So yeah, I am a big believer that low cost does a lot of things right.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the market at the minute, and maybe some of your network plans for this summer. I know we've obviously got a lot of people in the room that are keen to hear perhaps how you're restructuring your network. I know you're launching, I think it's 9 European routes this summer season, and we've obviously got Atlanta starting in June. Can you just give us a little bit of colour on the prospects for the season? Are you confident of a strong summer? We obviously saw yields were very high last summer. Is the same going to happen this year?
Yeah. So I think actually the number is 20 new destinations. Right, good. Right, but some of that is because also we then fly from 2 or 3 different hubs to that particular destination, right? So, but there's 20 new routes that we're launching for this summer. Some of them daily, Atlanta. Some of them only once a week, right? But it's anything in between. Yeah, I never want to jinx it, but things look still healthy, right, for the summer season, and long may it last. I think, and maybe that is part of being the CEO, you're always a bit concerned with what goes on in the world more than maybe other people do. So I think there's two things that I see that are happening. First and foremost, over the last years, whether it was the Delta, Omicron, or Russian airspace, right? And then it became high energy pricing, and then it was high inflation, and then it was Israel, Gaza. People travel. That's really people travel, and I can say for myself, I'd never been to Aarhus. I'd been to Aalborg, I'd been to Billund, I'd been to various places in Denmark, not here. And the taxi driver this morning was a very fun guy. Alex and I, he asked, "Hey, how much time have you got?" And it was 10. I said, "Well, I have to be on stage at 11." And he said, "Well, I can take you on a detour. It will last 5 minutes." Well, it took 55 minutes in the end, but fine. Got here 5 to 11, plenty of time, very punctual. But it's beautiful. My point is, it was so beautiful. It reminded me actually of where I was born and where Jonas is from. And it's so beautiful, and you feel inspired immediately, right? And the guy was actually from Greenland, so we spoke about Greenland and everything else. But the world is too beautiful not to be seen, and I am a firm, in a sense, child of the industry. I do believe that people, let's make this not too philosophical, but whether it's Marco Polo or whoever, right, Hannibal, people have traveled and people will, and we have seen that consistently also again over the last 3-4 years. So that looks healthy for the summer season. Same thing. What I do see is on the cost side, especially for us, I think two things are happening. One, because we're in Chapter 11, we cannot hedge. So fuel at 90, that hurts, right? Pretty much every single other competitor can hedge and has hedged. We don't, so completely naked, that hurts. And it hurts all the more because the kroner is at an all-time low, right? Swedish kroner. And so for us, every single full kroner is a 2 billion Swedish kroner profit hit. And so in December, we were briefly at 9.9, and now we're again at 10.9. So just in 3 months, on a rolling 12 months basis, there is immediately 2 billion Swedish kroner, 200 million in just pure profit being wiped out because, well, nothing we did, right? And that always is very challenging. But hey, that's the industry.
Okay. And speaking of challenging your Asia network, I think you're back to 3 destinations in Asia.
Yep.
Do you foresee adding any more, or is it still the Russia overflight situation preventing more expansion in that market?
Yeah, no, it's Russia. It's nothing else. I would love to do more, but right now it doesn't make any sense. I still have a debate whether some of the current Asia flying makes sense. Jose was already smiling because he knew this was coming. But, right? I mean, it is tough. I mean, clearly the wide bodies in summer really successful. But yeah, the non-overflying Russia, it hurts. Right? It's very complicated. I think we did fairly well on some of the Asian flying, and some of the Asian flying over winter is clearly a challenge. And so no, I don't. Even though they probably would like me to do more, I don't think we're going to go more Asia.
Okay. Where are you evaluating though? Is there any destinations perhaps that you wouldn't have considered before the SkyTeam switch that you're now looking at? I know, for example, you mentioned Aeromexico, which I know is a market you know very well, having worked there for so many years. Is there any geographical regions that you're underrepresented that you think could benefit from an SAS?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm not going to list them. So
go on.
Exactly. Nice try, David. Nice try. No, I do. But look, let's look at it. We fly everything from Los Angeles to Tokyo. I do think that's an easy answer, but at least it gives some away. I do think we have to look within that scope first, right, to make everything work. Right. There you go. Right. That will hit the press. And yeah, there is stuff still that we can and should develop within there, right? So hey, US, Canada, there's clear ways for us to, I think, still grow. The United States is about that rebalancing. It's about, of course, getting closer to Delta and making sure that we can step that up over time. Right, so certainly as of the entry into SkyTeam as of 1st September. So this year, is somewhat of a transition year as well, right? I mean, that is just complex. We really first and foremost want to make sure that we limit the disruption to our passengers to a really minimal extent. Before you potentially then take on more stuff on the long hauls, right? And so that's where we are. But I think there's stuff we can do in there. I always have a few on my list that I ask the guys to run every year again, and at some point I will get my way. And then there was things that are logical if it hadn't been for Russia. Right. And it was bizarre, by the way. I have to tell you this, but I flew another airline the other day, and I changed rather last minute. I was in Asia somewhere, changed to another airline, which I won't name, and they were overflying Russia, and I realized it only when I was on board having a quick drink, and I saw it on the map, and I was like, "Jeez." Actually, very uncomfortable, because what if that aircraft goes tech, right? And you land somewhere in, okay, name a city, and what actually will happen? What will happen to me? Now, I don't think that in that sense I'm any special or more special than anyone else, but it's like, oh, okay, well, hold on, we've been pretty vocal about this whole thing. So yeah, what will happen to me, and what will happen to my phone, because I think they'll download shit out of it immediately, and so very uncomfortable. And there is still something about that, call it imbalance between the European airlines, let me speak for myself, for SAS, who are not overflying Russia, and the ones who do. And there is something also fundamentally wrong in that sense, right? Because I hope we all realize that when airlines do overfly Russia, they pay a royalty to Russia that in the end will go back to some tank or grenade in Ukraine. Right, so it felt very uncomfortable.
Do you think we've seen that in the US? There's been obviously traffic between China and the US is, I think it's about 20% of what it was pre-pandemic.
Right.
And there's still calls from the US airlines saying it's an unfair advantage on Chinese carriers to fly to the US. Do you think Europe should be doing similar? We're seeing a lot of Chinese airlines adding new routes between Europe and China, but obviously they have that competitive advantage that.
No, I think it's a great question, and I haven't really over philosophized it, but yeah, again, I was so shocked by realizing that I was on a flight that potentially could land in Russia if something were to happen, and secondly, that flight was contributing to the war machine in the Ukraine, and again, there's something wrong, right, in that sense. So. Great question. Let other people weigh in on that as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your fleet. You retired your 737s. You're expanding with bringing in A320neos. I think you've just brought back an A350.
Yep.
Can you perhaps just give us a little bit of colour on how that's changed? I know there's the Embraer fleet for the SAS Link as well.
Yep.
How that's changed and how you see it changing over the coming years.
Yeah. So I think when you talk about cocktails and everything happening at the same time, that was another layer, right? Where you have to completely take whatever you have and you go from 737s. Norway primarily was still where we had a lot of 737s, and they've just been phased out a few months ago, 4 or 5 months ago. And so that means you have to retrain all your pilots, and you have to get used to different engines that don't have engine covers the first time around. So very practical stuff, right? Where the 737s had engine covers, and we were able to deal with them in de-icing or in icy weather, which hardly ever happens, of course, in Scandinavia. And now we didn't have the engine covers, and now we didn't have this. And so de-icing is different for a 320 than it is for a 737. So it's... You have to get used to new aircraft, right? From just a practical, but also then training and everything else. Then there's mixed fleet flying. So all the training we do to make sure that our pilots are 320, 330 or 320, 350 trained. And all of that adds to the complexity of the training schedules that we're building. Again, that's why I see 24 as being a pretty transitionary year before we're far more stable. Already this year, we're far more stable because we don't have all the wet leases from last year. You still have an awful lot of training, and I think really 25, 26, 27, that will fade out and you'll have a much better life. So yeah, I think over time, Look, in the long run, right? In the long run, we're all dead, right? As they say. But in the long run, you'll phase out, of course, one of the two wide bodies, right? I mean, you won't keep that going, I think, for too long. But probably until the end of this decade, at least, we'll have 330 and 350. Mm-hmm. Then you need to take a decision, I think, whether it's going to be one or two. The LRs, I do want to make some clarifying statement, also because I see Niels here in the room. But I don't think that the test that we ran in the end on the regionals is not to be repeated. I don't think it was a failure. I think we'll be back at some point.
That's the transatlantic from Gothenburg and Aalborg.
Yeah, exactly, from Aalborg and Gothenburg. I think what we had to do, it's maybe a bit airline technical, but when you go into a joint venture, what you look at is how much profit has each party had, right, called your baseline, and then you start splitting the incremental profit. And clearly you don't want to start up too much going into those joint venture negotiations at some point, because then you're very loss-making and your baseline is very low, and then you give someone else, of course, 50% of what you could otherwise have driven. So I do think that at some point we'll have to look at that, and so that will be a key part of our fleet. And then, yeah, the rest is, I think, pretty straightforward. There's just going to be more 320 and no more 73s, and you'll have a view and then on link, right? I mean, how big can that be and how big should it be?
Mm. When do you anticipate placing a new aircraft order? I think you've got 13 A320s on order and 2 A350s. Beyond that, when do you see it?
Yeah, good question. We have asked around last year, and I think back then people were really cautious in the OEM market, both frames and engines. So I think it's also a matter of, again, when do people actually want to engage, and not so much, I think, just with SAS, but with the market as a whole. The two engines that are out there, one, the GTFs cause enough havoc as they are. Fortunately, we've got the LEAPs, and then secondly, there is the mid-sized engine that is just not great, trying to be polite. And so there's a real challenge, I think, for the industry over the next few years, right? What kind of metal inflow will you actually be able to absorb? Mm-hmm. So I think those macroeconomic questions. Last year, we at least decided that those macroeconomic questions have to be settled before anything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm looking at the clock and we are all out of time. But if everyone's happy with a few more minutes, I will carry on. I just want to talk a little bit about sustainability. I don't think we can come to Scandinavia, particularly on Earth Day, which I found out it was today. And not talk about sustainability. So perhaps if you could run through some of the key things you're working on. I know last year you doubled the use of SAF.
Yeah.
You're working on electric aircraft. You sold tickets for your first electric flight.
Yes.
You're working on hydrogen.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. Tell us about it.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, no, I think, first of all, as a person, raised by parents, certainly a mother who is always very engaged, also in local politics for a party which is considered fairly green. And so already in the 80s, 90s, we were really bombarded at home with this, and so it really comes naturally. I think certainly for SAS, they have been at the forefront before I was there, and they will be the day I leave, right, and years beyond. This is the place, I think, Scandinavia. There is truly something about the way Scandinavians are dealing with sustainability. It's not just it's real. It's fundamental, it's profound, it is ingrained, the way they think about it, and the way they think about not over-consuming. It is very interesting to live here again. And so the way I split it is indeed in three buckets. You've touched upon all three. I think when I look at the world's plans and IATA's plans, I also happen to be on the board of IATA, the 2050 goals. There's a lot of new technology in there, right? Because we do need to, as I keep on saying, we need to crack the code, and no one's been able to really crack it. So there's hydrogen. Now, there's two things with hydrogen. First, we're not going to build an engine or an aircraft that is up to Airbus. what we are doing together with Airbus is participate in that, call it, testing of the aircraft as such, right? Provide them with the data. How can we do that? How can we help? Because the world needs an hydrogen aircraft. And then secondly, together with Avinor and Swedavia, and Airbus, and actually producer Vattenfall, we are checking what is the infrastructural needs then at airports, right? How do you get? Let's assume that the world all of a sudden starts producing tons of green hydrogen, which we all need and would like to have tomorrow. How are you actually going to get it to plane, right? So that's what we're working on with them. Then there is step closer, electrical aviation. We are firm believers and invested at least morally and time-wise in Hart Aerospace, Gothenburg-based. Well-funded, well-run, good team, and we try and see what we can do with them to have indeed those first electrical aviation or electrical aircraft ready by 2028. And then there is SAF. And SAF is a frustration of mine for many reasons. I find it still difficult to see how we can't, as the world, that we can't produce more of it, that the price stays high, but it's also somewhat of frustration that on the demand side, on the people side, on just passengers, that everybody finds it important and relevant, and they all say that they want to do things, but they're actually not buying it. When it's already on our website, you can just buy it as an add-on, right? And I see more corporates teaming up. I see more corporates really trying to be part of our CSR, our corporate sustainability program, right? But yeah, still a long way to go. We've launched something which I find pretty cool a few months ago, a Conscious Traveler, and yeah, I think some people will find it a marketing gimmick. I will defend it tooth and nail. And what we have seen since we launched it is again a doubling of people proactively buying biofuel. Mm-hmm. So that's great. It's off a very low base, so we still need to pump that up. But we do see that people actually take it to heart, and that Conscious Traveler is, there's all sorts of things. There's another thing about sustainability. I will hack it. Sorry, I know we're over time, but this is an important one. Food waste, for instance, right, bothers me. And again, just raised by parents, and I'm pretty much sure all of you as well, right? Finish a plate, eat what's out there, because right, other people are not as privileged. And it's had made such a profound impact on me. I'm really a child of the 80s, where you saw the famine in Africa, and I really, really, really dislike it. And so tomorrow, actually, I'm going to our catering provider, which I've agreed to with our unions also, to show how much food we are still wasting. And that's two things. It's, of course, on passenger side, but it's also on crewing, right? What can we do together? I find it beautiful in Scandinavia. There's many hotels where you walk into, and it says, this is how many grams of food we've wasted per guest, right? And so let's do the same thing. So we've launched some pretty cool stuff. On every single short-haul flight already and long-haul soon, you can deselect, you can opt out of your food, and it's great, right? So this morning I had breakfast because I had my 7 o'clock flight. I'll have breakfast, fine, but I'm flying back at 4 this afternoon, and I've deselected, I've opted out of the food because I'll have dinner at, right, 8 when I'm at home. So yeah, you can already on SAS, and I really encourage people to do that. And then for long haul, you can also start pre-selecting which course you want, and again, leading to higher, I think, customer satisfaction, but also to less food waste. It's yeah, there are so many things you can do to just make the world a bit better.
It's really good to hear. It's obviously clear that SAS, you take this very seriously, and there's so many things going on within the organisation. Is the message cutting through, though? I know at a recent stockholder meeting we saw some protests from environmentalists. Does the aviation industry have an image? Well, obviously it has an image problem, but how can that message cut through better than what we're doing at the minute?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the message. I do think I do see somewhat, I don't know if it's called counterbalance or counter-argument or whatever, but when I joined, it was still indeed very much about flight shame and everything else. Now, I do think it's had an impact because there is less corporate traffic. I think COVID did much more of that because everybody's on Teams nowadays. But secondly, I do think that people are talking again about connectivity and about how can we make sure that countries and whole regions are connected. I always find the discussion about connectivity a bit of an, it's almost like it's a capital arrogancy, right? And hey, I grew up in a very tiny village, and I know the relevance of being connected. I mean, the connectivity discussion in Aarhus is completely different than the one from Copenhagen or Stockholm or Oslo, right? So let's make sure that these countries are connected, and certainly elongated countries such as Norway and Sweden with the landmass that they have, they will need domestic flying. There is no rail. There is no. I mean, try and put a rail in Norway, right? Good luck. With all the mountains and the fjords, it's not going to happen. So what we need to do collectively is make sure that we transition, right, into green, and then you get to supply, and you need to get to price, and you need to get to cracking the technological codes. No one is against that, and certainly there is a group of airline CEOs who's pushing very hard, but the stuff is just not out there, right? We can't even buy it.
Okay, and that needs investment. That needs
investment,
support.
and I think always that needs government investment, because why would any company do it and start hurting their own bottom line when passengers are clearly not yet there? Passengers are not buying it for right reasons that I mentioned, and so it needs, I think, a government approach. And the governments have done that before, right? Whether it's solar panels and heavy subsidies in solar panels, or again looking at Norway. Everybody's driving a Tesla. That wasn't because all of them wants to buy a Tesla. It was because of massive subsidies by the Norwegian government, because the Norwegian government feels a bit guilty because they pump out oil and gas the whole time. So they thought, you know what, let's everybody drive a Tesla, and then we feel better about ourselves. Great, fine, forget that. But right, I see people nodding, so it's true. And so yeah, great. But at least everybody's driving in electrical cars in Norway, and they've made that transition. But it did need a government scheme, if you like, right?
Okay.
Program.
Well, I know we're out of time. I'm looking at Luthier just to see if we have time for one or two audience questions. I know I'm probably keeping you from your lunch, which starts soon.
I'm okay, one or two, but if you need to go somewhere else and have better things to do, then I also understand.
But if we do have one or two questions from the audience, now's the time if you want to raise your hand. But if not, we will. Yeah, go on, Mark, on the front row.
Thank you, Chair. Anko, thank you. Great speech. Really great to see a very frank CEO. Captain Izam from Malaysia the other day at Roots in Langkawi was very similar to you. Not as funny. On the fleet, though, just checking, what do you need on your fleet? You know, you talked about the inflow and you talked about the problems, which is kind of maybe delaying or even delaying the OEMs from letting you order. But what do you need?
Well, I think in the end you need look any.
And what timing?
Well, let's first get to need. Every single fleet decision is always a leap of faith in a way, right? Because for your organization you maybe not have them, right? I mean, if it's 320s, it's pretty clear, right? We know about the 320s, so then you definitely talk about slots. But I think when you talk about the engines nowadays and potentially other aircraft types. Well, yeah, then you need mitigation of risks in the end, right? Can they give you a comfort feeling of what it will be like and what support packages they will give you if something were to happen, right? I know that I speak to many different airlines around the globe, who I will not list here publicly, but they have either, well, let's talk percentages, but it's still somewhere between 20 and 35% of some of their new fleets on the ground. That's the most expensive mistake you can make, and it's not a mistake that you've made as an airline, but it's, of course, risk that you do have to manage. And so, yeah, you do need certainty, right? Or the nearest thing to certainty, at least, that you can get.
Thank you. On your fleet plans, what do you need on your fleet in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, actually, I can't really give you that answer because we're working through that at the moment. I think the biggest thing for us was, of course, to get the equity raise done last year, right, and people to buying into a plan. And the next step is then, okay, that's happened, now next step. So I think it will probably take another 6 months before we are done. Well, 4 months maybe before we're done with that.
Great, thank you. I think we've got one more question just over.
A very short question. Referring to drones and drone taxis, and around the corner there in Dubai, there are other places. Do you see any future of drone airline companies?
Yeah, so I've had long discussions. There was someone who is investing in them and asked also my opinion. I hope so, in many ways, because I do think that every technological breakthrough will lead to something. I do see also military-wise, for instance, that those drones, of course, become much better, bigger, and so it's not difficult to foresee that at some point you talk about aviation. Now, whether that is, I'm not going to go into a 2-pilot, 1-pilot, or no pilot, because I think that is in many ways irrelevant in that discussion, because there will always be pilots, and I think there will be a combination of up in the air and on the ground, right? Because that's the way it's been done today, and I think that will also be done in the future. The challenge that I see for now is if those drones are too small, it will be very hard to, I think, make things work, because if you have 2 passengers on board, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of fixed costs in operating that. How are you going to make that work? So, challenge. But I'm hopeful because, again, I really encourage technological breakthroughs in that sense.
Okay, thanks for the question. Before we close then, just want to get your thoughts on how you see SAS developing in the next 5 years. What is the airline going to look like 5 years from now?
Yeah, great. So a few things. So first of all, network-wise, I think we've spoken a lot about. So we are Scandinavia's airline, and we will be. Right, this year is 78 years, and we'll be here for another 78. So that's good news. And I think also with the investment that we got last year, that makes it, of course, easier. I think the second thing there is, we have spoken about it, but I do want to say it again. The new partnerships provide us with a lot of hope, right? I do think that will give a boost to interconnectivity between different parts of the world and different airlines in a different setting for us that we have not seen ourselves, right? Call it that purple that we spoke about. And the third thing is that I have found, and this is not to be critical, but at least hopefully positively pushing, I do want to lead an airline that is surprising, delighting, that is fun, that is out there. And I have, said before also internally, I do find it occasionally too static and too still. And so things like Destination Unknown that we did, right, a mystery flight, was a tremendous success because I think also because people didn't expect it from SAS. Right? Well done on the team. I had nothing to do with developing it, so really full credit to other people. But it's just fun. Be out there, right? Try something. Not when you're in a cockpit, but try something when you're in commercial, right? And so when you're in commercial, give it a go, right? What's the worst that can happen, right? And so try it and be alive, be relevant, be out there. And there's all sorts of fun things I think that we can do.
Are you going to be doing more of that? For anyone who doesn't know, this was the flight. It turned out to be Athens, but
it turned out to be Athens, but people didn't know until they were on board of the aircraft, or until they were actually halfway through. And it was really fun. What was really fun about it was that I swear that until 5 minutes before departure, I did not know where they would be going. And hard to believe to some, I guess, but it's really the God's honest truth. And so what was fun, concept, we launched it, I think overwhelmed we were ourselves by the demand for it, right? So this was an A320neo, 180 seats, and you could just show up, well not show up, you had to tell us that you were interested, paid a nominal fee, and then right, the first 180 got on board. Not knowing where they would go. And what was beautiful about it was the team took it really to the extreme. They had contacted Flight Radar to make sure that it wouldn't show. Baggage tag said XXX. The screen said Schengen, so it didn't say where you were going. The app didn't say where it was going. The mobile boarding pass didn't say where it was going. So we've spent way too much time and way too much money internally on making sure that it really was a surprise. So maybe we'll scale that down a bit for next time. But it was great, and it was really great internally. People loved it, and it was great. I mean, it was a 4-day trip, and you all know NPS, right? So NPS is on a scale of 1 to 100. I think a typical airline is between, call it 10 and 40, whatever, 20 and 50 if you're really good. We had for those 4 days a 91 NPS. 91 for 180 people. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 81, 82. And so people from 19 to 82 entertained for 4 days, and the average for 4 days of all those people was a 91. That's just superb. So for all of you that are trying to mimic this, we've already trademarked it. We got the trademark last week, so we started that process in January, well before we flew. It's trademarked. Destination Unknown is ours, and yes, we're going to do more of that. It's
Look
fun.
forward to it.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah, hopefully be on one sometime.
Yeah, well, try
maybe it's the new future of route development, 100% load factor, right?
Well, we've been talking about that as well, because I think also a lot of airports and other people are interested in this, right? So, look, no, I'm not going to say this. I've got 5 ideas. I've got 5 ideas, 5 destinations, 5 concepts, because there's so many beautiful stuff you can do, right? So we're thinking maybe about a Destination Unknown ski. A Destination Unknown Premium. You can do a Destination Unknown Family. You can do, and so, yeah, it's trademarked.
On that note, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been fascinating to hear about the journey that you've been on so far and the ongoing transformation as well. So if you could just put your hands together for Anko.
Thank you.